Hello everyone, and welcome to another tutorial slash update video for the Per-Layer Camera Culling asset available on the Unity Asset Store. This is a pretty huge update, so for anyone who's downloaded this asset before, if you update, expect the values in the inspector to be cleared, expect some folders to be renamed. I kind of tried to collect all these game-breaking assets into one, changes into one mega update, and then rip the band-aid off all at once, as it were, rather than put out a slower trickle of updates that slowly broke, different things as the updates collected. For anyone new, please stick around. This is a tutorial video that's going to take things from the top because a few things have changed. So without further ado, let's jump into it. First things first, you'll have to select a camera in your scene that you want to use this asset with. Then you can drag the script onto it, or you can use the Add Component menu to add the Per-Layer Culling script. There are a few settings here that work globally. There's also this array of information that actually controls what happens with each layer. So you'll notice that these names correspond with these names here. If you add new layers or edit layers, you might have to do a quick refresh, maybe click a bool on and off, something like that. And then that will trigger this to update, and the rename will take. Now I want to focus in on the default layer and the long distance layers for this demo. Let's turn on those gizmos, and let's recolor this to kind of match the cubes. I've made the red ones on the long distance layer. I put the blue ones on the default layer. And if we adjust the default distance, you'll see everything adjusting because these booleans are checked, so they're locked to the default distance. And by default, all of the layers are locked to the default distance. If I just uncheck this on the default layer, then you can see that it doesn't move. It doesn't change with the default. You'll also notice that as I change the default, the far clipping plane gets updated, and that's because it's tied to whichever value in this array is the largest, the cull distance value. And that's just because obviously if you have a culling plane that's out further than the far clipping plane, you won't be able to see any objects that are supposed to be rendered, and vice versa. If the far clipping plane is too close, then you won't be able to see anything either. Something we don't do is mess with the near clipping plane, and you'll notice if I drag this down here, then we make sure that whatever the far clipping plane is going to be larger than the near clipping plane, because an inverted frustum isn't going to do us any good. Now the next thing here is the multiplier. So I'll just set this so you can get a look at what that does. Now if I set this to 0.5, you'll notice everything shrink. It applies a uniform multiplier to all of these values here. The idea being that, especially for users on mobile platforms where they've had a lot of success using this, the performance target may be hard to hit. It may be fluctuating depending on thermal throttling and things like that. So you can just use this distance multiplier as one value that you can change and then kind of uniformly modify rendering distances that way. Now something new, if you used an older version, you would know that I think it was every second there was an update that got triggered to apply any settings you changed here via scripting to the camera. Now that works a little bit differently, so you'll have to call the trigger update function. If you call that function, anything you set here via scripting will be applied to the camera at that time. It saves a little bit on resources, makes things a little more lightweight, but it is a little more responsibility on your end. For anyone who's not scripting with this and who just wants to use it in the editor, as long as you're in the editor, whether you're in play mode or elsewhere, when you modify these values in the inspector, that's being called automatically, which is why you see things updating here. So the meat and potatoes of this obviously is this here. If we look at the game view for a second, you can see as I adjust the distance for these objects on the default layer that some of them are disappearing. Now something you might not expect, if you rotate the camera in place, you'll notice a popping effect. That's simply because if we take a look here from the top down, you can see that as the camera rotates and as the frustum moves around, different objects are inside and outside of that volume. That's just because the center of the camera to the center of this culling plane is a different distance than from the center of the camera to the edges of that plane. One way to fix this that Unity has kindly provided that I've added to the asset to expose here is to use a spherical culling distance. And I visualize that with this spherical gizmo. And now anything that's inside of that frustum and inside of that sphere are going to be the things that are rendered. So you'll notice here now we only see these handful of blue cubes. If I turn that off, you'll see more pop up. And the ones that are disappearing are those that are in this sort of no man's land out here. The benefit of having this option turned on is that if you rotate, you'll notice that nothing pops in and out, because everything's sort of a uniform distance if you're looking from a spherical perspective as opposed to a frustum perspective. So that's really useful. I haven't come across anything in the documentation that indicates that there should be a huge performance cost to that. That being said, I definitely recommend profiling with that option on and off to do some tests, make sure that there's no hiccups on your end. For my part, I always leave this option on now. I never have any reason to turn it off, and I really enjoy it. The only other things, there's a couple tiny features that I don't want to miss. There's this reset all to default button, and all that's going to do is it's going to reset all of these values, the call distance values, lock them to this default distance, and then check that little box to lock them. There's also this always show gizmos box. If you check that, now when I click away, the gizmos are just hanging out, so we can kind of take a look inside any volumes that we have and get a closer look at things. And then if you just check that, it'll turn off as you'd expect the gizmo to turn off when you don't have the object selected. The last thing that's changed is in all previous versions, if you removed this asset, you would have to hit play mode and then exit play mode in order for the camera to reset itself. Now, it's a little bit smarter about it. As soon as you remove the component, we'll see here, everything will be reset back to default values, and immediately, and you can kind of see, okay, this is what things look like without the asset, without saving on rendering at all. I think that about covers it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, bugs, anything else, please contact me on my website via the contact form or using the email, both of which can be found on the Unity Asset Store. So thank you for taking a look. I hope this continues to help people for another half decade to come. I hope whether you're having a caffeine-fueled coding session or just wrapping up the week or whatever you're doing, you're having a good time of it. And I'll talk to you in the next update or tutorial video.